The Radio Misfits Podcast Network.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Planted with Sara Payan podcast. I'm Sara Payan, your host, and today we are at the California State Fair. This is the only fair, actually, the only government-sanctioned cannabis celebration and competition in the world. And we are here on a beautiful, very hot day in Sacramento, where we're looking outside at a consumption area, lots of vendors, people having a good time, misters. It's wonderful. And, before we get going, I'd also like to thank our sponsors, Humboldt Family Farms and Embark, for making this happen. I'm also a buddhist, so I'm here with my crew. So thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited to start this conversation. Today on the podcast, we have Director Nicole Elliot of the DCC. Hey there. We have Dustin Moore from Embark.
Happy to be here.
And Scott Vasterling from Humboldt Family Farms.
Hello.
I'm so excited to get going on this. There's so much going on. We've come so far, and the four of us have been doing this for a minute. So I'm really looking forward to digging in. Let's start with the state of cannabis in California. What's the current health of the cannabis market from your vantage point? Nicole, do you want to start?
Sure. And I just want to start by saying super excited to be here. It wouldn't be a state fair day if it weren't hot as hell. And it's really weird to hear you say I've been doing this for a long time because time flies. Okay, with all that said, state of the health of the market. Well, I think it depends on who you ask. That's my honest answer. We asked an economist a little while back, and we put out a report that talked all about the sort of factors of the market and whether they looked stable, whether they were frail, the types of variables that impact that. It found that there's some stabilizing starting to happen in the market, but that there are really key pain points that the state would be remiss if they didn't pay attention to. Some of those we've worked hard to address in the last couple of months. Others remain outstanding, and some will remain long-term efforts. So state of health of the market, in some ways it's continuing to stabilize after many years of transitioning, but there's a long way to go before we can say it's at full-fledged health.
Yeah, for sure. When I look at this through like an org psych perspective, we talk about organizational change and storming, norming, and reforming. And I feel like we're in the midst of a lot of that right now. And it takes time. I mean, the movement's been here a long time, but as an industry, we are still nascent.
Yes. And also, when we look at those certain factors that define the health of the market, one of the things that we look at is the amount of uptake of existing consumers in the legal market. We're at 40%. That's better than 0, but it's not 100. And so the work that we all together have to do to get more locals participating, to get more of our pre-existing consumers to transition into the legal market, creating more price competition between the legal and illegal. There's just a ton of work to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Scott, what do you think?
I mean, I look at it from the farmer perspective. And so, there are farmers that have good business practices and bad business practices. And I think anytime that there's a new set of regulatory framework, coming from legacy into a regulated market, there's a lot of challenges with some farms or businesses and brands have overextended themselves. And so they seem to have more challenges with, complying with a lot of the regulatory framework because they're already strapped because of commitments that they've made on their farms to get them to where they are over many, many years. I think that I'm amazed at the normalization of cannabis. And I think that the state fair, honestly, is such an incredible place to sit side by side with all other agriculture in the state, small businesses, big businesses. And so it's an incredible honor to be here for the second year and to see this happening and see the support that the community, not just here in Sacramento, but from the state, has is we're moving in the right direction, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you can't do what we've done overnight without having challenges. But it's how you react and how you navigate those challenges with compromise with all of the stakeholders, from the regulatory, from the retail. And I think that's where, we have to find some savviness, and we have to find some, work with the good actors that have a long-term vision for the industry, because this is the direction that we're moving.
Yeah, exactly. And full disclosure to the audience, Scott and I'm the vice chair, and Scott is the chair of the state Cannabis Advisory Committee. So we have a lot of conversation. So grateful.
Thank you.
So on that, normalization influencing policy. Do you think that events like this will create more normalization so that we can push forward better policy? And I'm still getting to you, Dustin, so don't worry.
This is the future of normalization. I mean, as Scott mentioned, we're being celebrated alongside California's finest agriculture. And as the largest agricultural crop by dollar value, it's only fitting. We're being recognized by a 171-year-old competition to award the same golden bears that you get for the best wine, cheese, craft beer, and olive oil in the state of California. So that recognition, partnership with our regulators, partnership with the state fair, and partnership with the industry. And we do have to grow out of this together. But going back to the state of cannabis in California, we'd be remiss not to mention the federal quagmire. I think as an industry in California, we are starting to get through the bottom of the trough. We're starting to see a correction. But, with an adversarial administration using cannabis as a tool to, weaponize political agendas against the great state of California, that's the resistance, I find that to be a bit disgusting. And it's really hard. I think a lot of folks want to point fingers at what's happening within California, but you can't address the challenges we face in California without federal reform. The state of California cannot change federal banking laws. It can't reschedule cannabis. It cannot, ensure that interstate commerce can occur. So, I think with the deck stacked against us, we're excelling. In days like today, where we're all together celebrating in this beautiful, hot moment, gives me a lot of hope.
Yeah, thank you for that. And actually, going back to this, we're talking about the state of, cannabis in California, and we've kind of had a wild week. Can we talk about federal enforcement and its place in the great state of California? Maybe just what we don't want to see, because we're being scapegoated, especially because, we have people of all political persuasions and beliefs, but California is, even though we are the fourth largest economy in the world and we're a very large state with different views, we're constantly beat on as being a liberal bastion, being used as an example. So how does that manifest in, just the enforcement in the federal government getting involved?
Yeah, you're right. It's been a tough week. It's been a tough couple days in particular, I think, for everyone in the space, myself having to engage in it included. The thing I'll say about federal enforcement, what we're seeing, people in other states also are experiencing, but there is a really intense ire being focused in this state on our people. And the types of things that we're seeing, the militarization of our domestic streets, of our businesses, of our communities, is wrong. Full stop. And so I appreciate working for an administration that fights back against that as just in the course of business, because philosophically, there is no point of agreement.
Humboldt Family Farms is rooted in the legendary hills of Northern California, where cannabis isn't just grown, it's lived. As one of the top sun-grown cannabis brands in the state, Humboldt Family Farms represent a collective of multi-generational family-run farms deeply committed to sustainable practices, environmental stewardship, and the craft of cultivation. Every harvest reflects decades of knowledge and a deep respect for the land, the plant, and the people who enjoy it. Now, they're partnering with Surfer Magazine and Embark for a first-of-its-kind collaboration, the first time in Surfer's 65-year history that they've ever partnered with a cannabis brand. The drop includes Humboldt Family Farms' iconic Maui Wowie flower and Hawaiian Fanta pre-rolls. You'll find the collab exclusively at Embark locations across California, and a limited number are dropping as part of Embark's weekly Getaway Bag series, a fresh tote every Friday packed with California's best cannabis. And it sells out every time. Embark has earned its place as California's most trusted cannabis dispensary, but they're not just selling cannabis. They're creating experiences that connect people to the plant and proving that it can be a force for good. They're pioneering what normalization looks like, bringing legal sales and consumption to places no one thought possible, like the California State Fair and Cali Roots. This summer, they'll do it again at Dead & Company's 60th anniversary in Golden Gate Park, followed by their 5th year at Outside Lands, with Humboldt Family Farms right alongside them. Every Embark location gives back 1% of sales to its local community, helping fund youth drug prevention programs and logging thousands of volunteer hours across California. A collaboration like this with Surfer Magazine and Humboldt Family Farms is an extension of this mission. It proves that cannabis can exist in mainstream culture, that it belongs in iconic spaces alongside one of the most demanding sports in the world. This is what progress looks like. For more information, visit Humboldt Family Farms at HumboldtFamilyFarms.com, Embark at GoEmbark.com, and Surfer Magazine at Surfer.com.
With that said, I feel for the industry and the fear that the industry has around federal enforcement because of the history in this space. I think where the federal government would be better served is actually conducting drug enforcement on illegal operations. Not state licensed operations that are compliant with state law. And there is an opportunity to do more in the unlicensed space. I know that's a controversial take, but there are some really big, really bad operations out there that should be more of a focus for the federal government, I might argue. So it's been a tough week. I'm not going to pretend that it's going to get easier. This is a really volatile administration. We're really focused on trying to lift up the benefits of a regulated system, the benefits of the California legal cannabis market. It's been here for decades. It's not going anywhere. And the state's going to stand behind that concept because at the end of the day, it's better for the people. It's better for the public. It's better for communities. It's better for businesses. And it's better for the people who work there.
Absolutely. Dustin, do you have anything that you'd like to contribute to that?
I mean, I just think that the war on drugs is alive and it's thriving. And it's disgusting to me to see that, an administration is weaponizing cannabis for political gain. But cannabis has been weaponized for political gain and to oppress people, forever. So this is nothing new. We shouldn't expect anything different. But I think, whether it's the enforcement we've seen this week, that's affected, some large scale operations and has made, significant national headlines. I think what we forget is every single day, smallest operators in the state are being oppressed by oppressive federal policies that don't allow things like ordinary business expense deduction. So yes, we saw Black Hawk helicopters and Humvees and the Army, attacking a licensed facility this week. But what we don't see every day is the persecution being waged against us by the Internal Revenue Service and other predatory policies such as lack of access to banking. So, it's a multidimensional fight. But again, I really do have hope based on moments in time like this when things are the toughest. Like I can even speak to some of the state level policy that the industry's been collectively working on. We had a unified support around maintaining, to fight against a 25% tax increase. And while we haven't quite gotten there yet from the administration, all the way through every single operator, every single association in the state of California, for the first time since I've advocated on behalf of the industry, came together to fight around a common cause. So sometimes it takes the worst moments to bring out the best in people and for folks to come together. And I actually think that's what we're seeing here today. So I don't mean to be, rose-colored glasses, overly glass half full, but it's happening. And we have evidence to support that. And it's exciting.
And I want to add on that really fast because when we put our budget proposal out there, which really sought to take enforcement off the backs of our licensees, the cost of enforcement, the cost of track and trace off the backs of our fee payers, our licensees, we didn't get a second of real pushback from the legislature on that. There was unanimity that was the right thing to do. That is progress. That's important progress. So, that's tens of millions of dollars now that are not going to be paid by licensees, but that will be paid through the tax fund. And when we, the other proposals that we put forward in our budget, majority of them also supported. So there's a lot of trust building to do with our elected officials and policymakers. Departments made great strides in doing that with the legislature and trying to move major policies forward, where we don't have a second of doubt from our legislators that that's the right thing to do. So, piggybacking off of his comments, there is some really good progress that's been made. More to come, I hope.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like events like this, when people start to realize that they have more pull with their elected officials around policy, and maybe won't be as afraid to contact them and let them know that they are a consumer and they care about this and that we need to be making change, creating better policy, supporting the industry. Because honestly, like when we look at the taxes, some of the taxes fund some very, very valuable things, but we could be supporting even more if we were living in a state where we could survive, because more people would be participating in the legal market. And that is a boon for the state too.
Yeah, I think we totally agree with that. And that's why you saw the governor say that if he got a bill to his desk that halts the increase, he'd sign it. It's very rare he makes those statements proactively. So I hope people notice that. In particular, I hope the Senate notice that, and that becomes a reality. He gets a bill to his desk so he can sign it.
Absolutely. Now, Scott, as somebody who's rooted in legacy farming, and now you're the chair of the State Advisory Committee, how do you balance heritage with modern regulatory frameworks?
Are you looking for a lasting, meaningful way to connect with your audience and highlight your brand? Well, listen up, because Planted with Sara Payan is taking on new sponsors. Here's a powerful stat. 20% of listeners are more likely to support brands they hear about on a trusted podcast. And 60% actually look up that product after hearing about it. That's the power of podcasting. Planted with Sara Payan has a unique draw. With remarkable guests, we attract and engage audience that spans all sides of the cannabis spectrum. Picture your message reaching these listeners time and again. Podcast ads are evergreen, meaning your brand stays relevant as new audiences discover and binge past episodes. It's a long-term investment that keeps on giving. If you're looking for a targeted, passionate audience with lasting impact, the right listeners are here waiting to meet your brand. Visit plantedwithsara.com to get a copy of our sponsorship deck today.
That's a great question. And I think that a lot of bobbing and weaving, because I think one of the things that in working with the legacy community is, we work with a lot of farmers that don't have brands per se. And so to be able to take on the burden of the last mile, I guess I'll say, versus the farm regulations is one thing. Navigating distribution, retail, and those types of things is a whole nother ballgame. And so I think being able to help support the farmers that want to continue farming without necessarily a brand on the shelf, but creating a platform for them to navigate the regulated market from farm all the way through the supply chain with great partners like Nabis in distribution and Embark in retail, and the DCC helping navigate the regulations from the entire supply chain. In my opinion, I think that collaboration is what's so critically important. And I think that what we're finding now is we're seeing a lot more collaboration in the market. Now, a lot of the good actors, I will say, are starting to kind of work together to help navigate it and learn from lessons and, putting their best foot forward together, whether it's in regulations or it's in business with, we're seeing all kinds of cool collaborations between brands and outside of brands, right? We're now starting to see with this normalization, like this drop that we just did with Surfer Magazine, right? We're now starting to see celebrating the sun-grown lifestyle. And that's something that has been a pleasure to see a mainstream media outlet now come in and start celebrating the culture of cannabis in their sport that goes back to the 60s and 70s. And Jake Howard, who we've all had conversations with, and some of the stories he's telling blows me away. So that's all part of the future that we're starting to sprinkle in now.
And if I could, just we've come full circle because I met Scott over a decade ago when I was advocating alongside a group of sun-grown farmers, including Tina Gordon from Moonmade Farms, just to ensure that the folks who brought the industry forward didn't get left behind. And we had a full circle moment with Surfer Magazine. Tina's flower, working with Scott, ended up on our shelves and was promoted by Surfer Magazine. I mean, it really is a decade in the making to celebrate all of those who came before us and those who are going to continue to pull this charge forward. And it's, I think you said it really eloquently. And it is just this overall theme of togetherness. And I think that's something I'm just excited to celebrate with you all here today.
And Dustin, piggybacking on that from the retail side, how are you seeing consumers respond to California cannabis in 2015 versus a few years ago?
You know, I'm really excited to see consumers starting to pay attention to what they're putting in their body. I credit the licensed market for that because before there was a licensed market, there was no testing, right? So people didn't really understand what they were putting in their bodies. You know, you'd have people that would go 45 minutes out of their way to buy an organic kumquat at the farmer's market, yet purchase cannabis that had, you know, it was infiltrated with pesticides. And now today, I'm proud to say, you know, in many ways, that organic kumquat wouldn't pass the same testing standards required to put cannabis in your body. And that's important because these are products you're inhaling. And I think long term for this industry not to become big tobacco or some other harbinger that's just become demonized for the right reasons. I think this industry and these regulations around just testing as an example to ensure that, you know, we're maintaining maximum public health are going to ensure that we're not going to face that same scrutiny. But the consumer's evolving rapidly. It's no longer just the highest THC for the lowest dollar price. I think people are moving away from, you know, purchasing cannabis and they're looking to purchase experiences. And that's something that we're starting to see in our stores. It's people want to understand, what this product, what are the effects going to be? How is it cultivated? How is it packaged? And then it's exciting to see the consumer start to mature.
Absolutely. And on that note, something for you all to think about. How do we make California more hospitable to innovation without compromising public safety? Because back in the 2015 days, we'd see some wild stuff, but there'd also be some really interesting products that didn't quite make it to legalization because of the framework. How do we navigate that?
I think it's a great question. It is a key component of California in general because of the scale, because this state is built on an incredibly innovative community. And when it comes to cannabis, the way that we see that manifested, if you take a specific example, attractive to children packaging, right? One of those issues that, as Dustin points out, we have an opportunity to have an industry that reflects better than some of its predecessors. And when you look at the way some other states approach attractive to children, they review each label each package before it goes to market. That's absurd in a state the size of California with the level of innovation that the state of California has. And so part of that is really accountability within the industry, while harnessing that innovation, making sure that it's being steered in a really responsible way. Where the department comes in and where we focus our energy is trying to provide the industry, create for the industry tools to help them do that. And that's exactly what we're doing right now.
Scott, what are your thoughts?
You know, it's interesting because I think back to the days before testing, right? And so from the farm, everything was bred or created for an experience, not for a test result. And so I think that we're now starting to see people realize how important the enjoyment of cannabis is when they use it for a purpose or an experience rather than just the highest THC for the lowest dollar. And I think that the award winners that are out on that board is a perfect example because you know what? They aren't necessarily the highest THC or the lowest dollar. There's some incredible products with a whole variety of cannabinoids now that are bringing back from generations that are winning awards and they're being incredibly sought after.
Yeah. When you say that, that reminds me of when I first started working in a dispensary. And back in the day, you'd work a shift and you'd get a free gram of cannabis. I had my little bag with all my different grams, and I realized that they were good for different things, different times of the day. And my friends who weren't in cannabis would be like, well, that's just silly. But they were coming from a place of, for so long, we got what we got. And we used it in the evening to get high, unless we were using it. There were people who were using it medicinally, but not as many people were tuned into that. And there is this nuance that I think as we do normalization and more people are curious about trying, they can see from a wellness perspective, even, or a balance at different times of the day, homeostasis, different products that can serve them in different parts of their lives. Dustin?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that R&D is certainly challenging in the regulatory environment for some reasons, because obviously before there was regulations, you could do whatever you wanted and see what happens. That doesn't necessarily maximize public health, but I am seeing a lot of innovation. So as an example, our partners at the Equity Trade Network, one of their brands has created a joint that has stripped out basically all of the terpenes, et cetera, that cause an odor. So when you're at Thanksgiving and, your uncle that has different political views than you is driving you absolutely crazy, you can step outside, consume cannabis without, anybody knowing. I mean, I'm seeing that type of innovation. I'm also seeing, a lot of innovation through collaboration. I think seeing some of, the more modern, hash has been around forever, but seeing some of the rosin products that are coming out that are collaborations between excellent hash makers and farms is incredible. I think since legalization and under regulation, we're learning more about our endocannabinoid system. So like EndoCanna is an example where you can actually understand your own, endocannabinoid system and then be able to purchase products that speak to your endocannabinoid system. Because I think those are the things that people did in the past was like, how does this make me feel? Now we have ways to point to the underlying science and data that can actually enhance that experience without having to experiment as much. Because I'll tell you personally, like certain strains are better for me than others. And I learned that the hard way, but now you can actually de-risk that experience. So for consumers who are just entering the market, you can, remove that taboo a little bit.
I also like for the people who have enjoyed cannabis for a long time that we're seeing a resurgence of not only legacy genetics, but like things like Thai stick are starting to come back. Or like when I used to work in a dispensary, if we had pressed hash, and I knew that there was usually, and I'm not trying to leave out the ladies, but a gentleman of a certain age whose eyes would twinkle if I said, guess what I've got behind the bar? And there's that surprise and delight that goes along with that too,
This episode is brought to you by Fat Nugs Magazine, a global perspective of cannabis and stoner culture as a bridge to the rest of the world. Right now, you can join Fat Nugs Magazine, Beard Bros Farms, Freedom Grow, and Jailed for Weed in the upcoming Prisoners Edition and help spotlight current and past cannabis prisoners and their stories, because no one should be in jail for a plant. Find Fat Nugs Magazine's beautiful print copies at your local dispensary, fatnugsmag.com, and on socials. Cannabis culture welcomes us all.
So, Nicole, what policy changes are being considered to support greater equity and sustainability in the legal market?
It's a great question. Both words can be taken from many different angles. So in general, our work is constantly to try and create a market that's equitable and sustainable, try and facilitate that market. For purposes of where we're at in our market transition, we're starting to see our licensees transition into the full privilege of annual licenses, which is really exciting. This is the last year of that sort of statutory transition phase, if you will. So 2026 is when sort of steady state hits. We're seeing struggles in certain local jurisdictions, in particular, 2 areas of our state that have a heavy legacy community, equity community, legacy and equity community. And so we're doing a lot of extra work to try and help move those licensees into a stable state for 2026. and looking at some unique ways of doing that we haven't had to pursue before. Aside from that, a number of different programmatic elements that we continue to pursue. One of those is how licensees are able to tell their story, right? So how that manifests in our space in a number of ways. You talked about legacy genetics, right? When we look at our research grants, we have $30 million out now for academic research, but one of our previous grants that we've given out is really trying to identify and preserve legacy California genetics, with the hope that cements those genetics as that individuals, that community, and California's when the walls come down. And we can start to really promote that on a national level. Trying to maintain as much of a diverse industry as we can from licensee size, right? The work we just did on the budget was really meant to help support that too. Pulling away a 40% fee increase was a real big one. And then just continuing to work with licensees, trying to figure out what those pain points are through our CAC, talking about regulatory reforms. They're going to support easing those regulatory burdens that people often point to as this is the cost of doing business and it's too much, right? And it's keeping us from being competitive with our legal market, those types of things. So it's literally woven into everything we do every day.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Well, I'm just going to add that I think that you brought up a really good point, and that the importance of people engaging and providing feedback through the right channels, rather than stand up on a soapbox on Instagram and pound your fist and yell. That is a different way than actually participating in the process where your voice is legitimately heard by the people that need to hear it in order to make change.
100%. So taking our reg packages as a perfect example of that super, black and white way of engaging with state government. We read those comments. We listen to the comments at CAC. One of the things we did, you guys know this, is we started bringing our regulatory packages to the CAC before we submitted them to the formal state process so that we could have a much more fluid and engaging conversation with the industry, with stakeholders, to inform what we ultimately submit and how that package gets modified over the course of that process to become final policy, because everything we submit is draft policy. So the comments along the way, the comments in the CAC, they all matter and they all help make important change. So absolutely agree with you on that.
Yeah, we as citizens, we have more power than we give ourselves credit for. If you don't like what you see, get involved, do public comment, vote. These are all super important things. And I want to get into addressing the elephant in the room, the economic pressures on licensed operators. So what's the realistic path on tax reform that doesn't gut public funding, but gives small businesses more of a fighting chance? Because we've seen a lot of small operators disappear in the past few years. What can we do? Because these small operators are also the ones that the money stays in their communities. Their employees are local. Small business is the backbone of our state. How do we navigate this? And I know it's a tough question.
Yeah, I mean, there are a number of ways that we can. One of the programs I loved that is no longer funded, but we've advocated behind the scenes to have refunded, is our fee waiver program. That was money directly back in the pockets of equity operators for fee waivers. But in general, in thinking about ways to support the smallest operators and making sure that they stay in their communities and they're stabilizing their communities, we approach that, like I said, I mean, we've been talking about this the entire time in this conversation, the things that we're doing. Some of the things we didn't talk about, when we've had operators engage with us from a compliance standpoint, right? Doing proactive compliance work on that prem and making sure that we're supporting them so that when we're doing our routine inspections, those fix-it tickets, maybe they're light, maybe they're nothing. That in general is building trust with consumers because we're not seeing test failures, we're not seeing recalls, right? And that trust with consumers is what's going to drive the economy of this market. Shifting that additional 60% back into the legal market is what we need to do. That's what's going to support businesses, every size. And so really building that trust and accountability, working with our licensees to accomplish that from a compliance standpoint. And then, of course, some people disagree with this, but interstate commerce, we are a production state. There is a lot that California would benefit from if we were able to engage in interstate commerce. We pushed really hard on that a couple of years ago, got an unfortunate answer from the Attorney General, but I don't think that should be the end of the conversation. I think we should bring that back. And I can say, that's where I spend a lot of my time thinking about how we set this state up and this legal market up to be successful in the eventual day that those walls do come down and we do have interstate.
Any thoughts, guys?
I'm hopeful for AB 564 and SB 378. So there's a trifecta of bills in California today that would push more business into the licensed market and would bring parity for the 15% tax that the industry has shouldered for the last couple years. And the higher tax, I would argue, does not actually bring more money to the state. It drives more folks to the unlicensed market. So AB 8 is seeking to shut down effectively what's a secondary unlicensed dispensary market for intoxicating hemp products at gas stations and convenience stores and smoke shops. You have SB 378 that is going to shut down the ability for folks to be able to market those businesses online. When those two bills pass and get signed, that's going to push more business into the licensed market, at which point AB 564 will bring us back to 15%, which is going to raise revenues for the state. So it's that trifecta that, I want to manifest into reality. But again, the state can only do so much until there's federal reform with rescheduling or descheduling entirely, until you end up, with banking and truly, an equitable federal policy. We can try our best here, but we kind of have our hands tied behind our back.
You're seeing the feds move, right? You're seeing red and blue converge in a way that's pretty profound if people are paying attention. You just saw, Governor Abbott veto a bill in Texas that would have prohibited intoxicating hemp. And in his message, in his resolution vetoing that bill, he laid out 19 baseline requirements that he wanted to see in the regulatory framework for hemp products in the state of Texas. We have every single one of those in the state of California. That alignment is profound. And that's Texas and California, right? So there's some serious movement happening, whether it's under hemp, whether it's under marijuana, it's cannabis. And one day this plant is going to be one again and regulated as one again. And so that movement is pretty amazing.
And the signals that came out of Texas and then reverberated just this week in the United States Senate to confirm the Harris appropriations rider that would also take a similar approach to ensuring that, cannabis is treated as one plant does give me some hope. Now we just need the financial reform, whether that's 280E banking, whatever it may be. But, for the smallest businesses, they're being harmed the most without access to non-predatory capital. And I think the biggest challenge that the industry faces is predatory capital. So for a lot of the folks that are small one-off operators that just simply cannot access traditional capital, it's unfair. And it's really made it so, larger businesses are able to access capital in a completely different way through systems that just can't be accessed equitably. So I think financial reform, despite all of the other regulations, we definitely do need to have some changes, but access to capital will be key for the survival of the smaller businesses that came before.
Absolutely. Now, as we're wrapping up, one of the big things that we've seen that's been kind of a stopgap in the industry is local jurisdiction. What's working and what's not when it comes to local control over licensing? Who wants to start?
I mean, depending on how you do your math, 60 to 70% of California does not have access to licensed cannabis. And that is something that's a big, big problem. There is some grant funding that just came out through BCS. There's grant funding now available for municipalities to turn on retail. But at the end of the day, you can't have a successful supply chain if people can't access cannabis. So we need more retail in California. As a retailer, I see it firsthand every day. We're often the first to open in municipalities that were historically reticent to allow for cannabis retail. And what these municipalities find out time and time again is that there's great jobs. There's business owners that care, that actually give back to their communities and support those communities. So it's just crazy to me that we still have that large a swath of the state that doesn't allow for legal retail sales.
Yeah, I second that. I mean, we continue to have conversations with all the associations that support our local governments. We make ourselves available to local governments directly to engage them. Ask Kristen, she's been having a lot of those conversations too. And then, of course, in our budget proposal, which was ultimately passed, one of the suggestions was to change one of the grant funds that gets paid out through the tax fund to support enforcement, and prioritized the suggestion was to prioritize that funding for jurisdictions that allow retail. So moving everything off the table and saying, this is what we really care about with this is the carrot. So we look at everything as how can we get locals more involved. I have constant conversations with my general counsel about how do we make it easier for locals to engage so they don't have to do an entire programmatic EIR to get cannabis licensed in their jurisdiction. These are puzzles that we're trying to put together every single day because we recognize that without local participation, we're going to continue to feel some pretty serious pain points in our market, and that needs to be addressed through that participation. How the state can make that easier for them is an exercise we continuously go through.
And then just, again, back to our point earlier of just making the representatives of your local communities know what works and what doesn't work, and then present that in a professional manner. And they also want it to work because it supports their communities. The state also wants it to work. But if there's a lack of communication or too many emotions involved, I think it's critically important to come up with collaborative ways to navigate the system. Because it is a win-win situation because the industry survives, the regulatory board survives, taxes, our communities.
Yeah, it's all so interconnected. We're figuring it out. I'm just so grateful to have the three of you here today. It's just so good to see you. Thank you so much for this conversation. I'm looking forward to our future conversations because we have a lot to unpack in the coming years. And for those of you out there too, just want to do a shout out to our brand partners, Fat Nugs Magazine. If you haven't gone to the other side of this wall to get your smoke shot, you should, and pick up an issue. Also sign up for their newsletter. Thank you so much for coming. Everybody out there, stay engaged, get active, stay curious. And it's a crazy world out there. Stuff's happening. Be good to each other. Thank you so much.
And everyone, remember, if you like listening, please give us a review, share it with a friend, let us know what your favorite episodes are. And if you'd like to stay in touch over social media, we are Planted with Sara Payan on Facebook and Planted with Sara on Instagram and Twitter. You can also go to our website, www.plantedwithsara.com, or listen to us on our parent network, Radio Misfits Network, where there are other great podcasts, like one of my favorites, the Winemakers Podcast. So check it out. You can listen to Planted wherever you listen to your favorite podcast, whether that's Pandora, Spotify, Amazon, Google, Apple, Stitcher. Tune in. We are there. So join us. And until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and remember, it's a wild world out there. be good to one another. Until next time, take care.